the film, and I showed it to my parents in their home. And my father was sitting there in his blue bib overalls and his blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up to the elbow, and he was watching that film of those little white kids going through that exercise in racism, with the blue-eyed people being mistreated and the brown-eyed people being favored. He watched that for half an hour, and when it was over, he stood up, he took his red handkerchief out of the back pocket of his blue bib overalls, blew his nose, wiped his eyes, and said, "I wish somebody had taught me that when I was 9 years old." Now, I hadn't seen my father cry since I watched him cry after my little sister's death. But what he saw happening to those little kids, because of an exercise based on a physical characteristic over which they had no control, changed his idea about race and racism. At that moment, he said, "This has to stop." And he said to me later, when my mother was castigating me for doing such an awful thing to those children, he said, "Jane, you're sure you're right?" And I said, "Dad, I'm sure I'm right." He said, "Then by God, go ahead, let the sons of bitches complain." And they complained, and they did worse than complain. The other teachers tried to get me fired every year because I was what I was doing with those children. Every year, 30% of the parents would call the principal before school started and say, "Don't put my kid in Elliot's classroom. I don't want my kid in Elliot's classroom." I'll never forget the person who called and said, "I don't want my kid in that N-word lover's classroom, but I want him to learn to read, so put him in there anyway." And he put him in there, and the kid learned to read, because I can do that. I can teach that chair to read if it had a mouth. It was difficult to be treated as though I had done something totally insane, when what I had done was create a microcosm of society in my third grade classroom. I did, for one day for the brown-eyed people and one day for the blue-eyed people, what we have done to people of color in this country for the last 300 years. We don't put a stop to it in this country. We think that's the way it is. We think if you're white, you're all right. We continue to do it. We continue to tolerate it. We continue to protect it. We continue to go along with it. We continue to hire teachers to do it. I've heard horrible things said in front of students by teachers who get hired the next year. It was the kinds of things that are said by coaches on some basketball courts and on some football fields and on some wrestling mats should never be allowed to be said. And the coaches who are saying them should be fired immediately, because you can't teach about racism if you're practicing it in the wrestling room, or in the locker room, or on the basketball court, or on the football field. But I had done the worst thing you could possibly do by treating my little third graders for one day the way we treat people of color for a lifetime in this country. And we don't wait until you're born. We start prenatally. A group of midwives, registered nurses, called me last year and asked me if I would speak to them. I said, "Why?" They said, "Because we work in delivery rooms." I said, "Look, I was delivered of 4 children in 5 years, but I don't know anything about medicine. I know about how a child gets delivered." She said, "That's not what we want to talk about. We want you to talk about racism." I said, "Why?" She said, "Because we know that children of brown and black mothers don't get the same treatment in the delivery room that children of white mothers do. And we're midwives so that we can go into the delivery rooms and deliver children and treat them all the same." She said, "We can deliver these children away from the delivery room and they can get the same treatment if we're doing the delivery." Now think about that. We don't start with you. We don't wait to start until after you're born. We do it to you before you're born. And then we don't stop after you're dead. There are still cemeteries in the United States of America where black people are not allowed to be buried, because those cemeteries are for whites only. Now, think about how ugly this is, and how self-defeating it is, and how much pain it has cost us, and how much money it has cost us. However, you need to realize that the reason we perpetuate racism is because it is a moneymaker. You can build a prison. You can hire a bunch of people to guard the people in that prison, about 300 people. Communities like to have a prison come to their community because that's 300 people who didn't have jobs before they got there. And I have worked with some prison employees, and let me tell you, that's an interesting experience. But you need to see the film A Class Divided. If you haven't seen it, get a copy of it and look at it. And look at what those people who are in the business of guarding people in the prisons talk like, the way they act, the way they think, and the things they are willing to do to maintain their position. We open a prison, we put you in prison for whatever crime we decide you have committed. And if you remember, 3 strikes, you're out. I do. That's another thing I remembered. Remember, the third the third crime that you commit can get you sent to prison. And in the prison, you can be forced to work for 8 hours a day for 22 cents an hour. The money that you make goes to the victim of your crime. Now, if there's no victim, where does the money go? If you force a person to work and furnish him food, lodging, and clothing, that's called slavery. Now, think about that. We have reinstituted slavery with the prison industrial system in the United States of America. And then you look at the percentage of people who are in prison who are people of color, particularly the males. And then you look at how easy it is for a melanatic person to go to prison for the same crime that a melanemic person can do and get a slap on the wrist. If you think that our justice system is just, you're wrong. And if you haven't read the book, y'all know the name of this book, so tell me what it is. Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow.
Yeah.
Have you read it?
Yeah.
All right. Isn't this exactly what she says? And if you look around and you do just a little bit of, just investigate a little bit, and you realize that she was right when she wrote the book, and she's right today. And what Bill Clinton did was cause a whole bunch, thousands of young black males to go to jail. You can send your raw materials into a prison and have something produced at a whole lot less than it would cost you if you sent those materials overseas or did it in the public sphere instead of in the prison. Our prison system is not a just system. Criminal justice is an oxymoron. It's mostly criminal and damn little justice, particularly if you're a person of color.
Absolutely. The not experiment.